Welcome to the overview webinar for the Draft 2 State of the Devils River report. The goal for today is to go over the changes that were made between the first draft and the second draft. It's over 200 pages now, so we don't want everyone to feel like they have to go through and read the entire document. So this is meant to provide you an overview of what changes were made and help you navigate to those if you want to do some additional review. So next slide. So during the webinar, it would be great if you could go ahead and mute yourself in case somebody walks into your space or something happens. Leaving your video, I think at this point, I'm not sure if you can have your video on or not, but for those of you watching the recording, it doesn't matter. You're welcome to turn your video on, and if you're here and ask questions at any time, you can also put your questions in the Q&A box. And we'll take those as we go, but really open to a conversation as we navigate the document together. So it's a very casual hour together here today. So like I mentioned, I'm gonna reference the document that Desiree included on the invitation, which is also in the report for your reference, but we really are gonna scroll actually through the track change document so you can see exactly where we made changes. And we're happy to stop and talk about those as we go, or really the goal is to just highlight those for you if you want to go back and spend some more time on your own. Either way. So like I said, we'll record this, you can reference it later, and this will be on the project website. All right, I also wanted to just quickly review, we'll come back to this at the end, but I know it's hard to keep track of all the things that are going on with the project, but we really are getting close to the finish line, and the draft 2 is out for your review right now. We are taking substantial comments. Anything you feel like is missing or mischaracterized, we'd love to hear it. And you have until November 1st to send us any of your feedback. And as always, you can just send that to me directly, Carrie Thompson at texasstate.edu, or call or use the website to submit your feedback. We're going to take a month after that to just totally finalize all the content. And then we'll deliver that final draft out December 1st, and you'll have a week to catch any sort of mistakes. It really, at that point, it's going to be just editorial commenting that we can handle in the tight turnaround we have, because we are supposed to turn this report in on December 13th. So that's the plan of attack for the general report. So I think next we'll just let me first share perfect, Desiree. This document was it was an attachment on the invitation for this webinar. It's also in the second draft report, so you can reference it there. But what we've done is taken every comment that we received and put it here in a catalog so that you can not only see what comments came in, but you can see how we responded to a comment. So you can just stop anywhere you like, Desiree, and let's read one for an example. So this one, wind energy is not adequately covered and should be expanded upon. So we note kind of when that was shared with us, when these comments were received, and then we do a little discussion of how we're going to handle the comments. So the discussion on wind energy has been expanded to include this information. And, here's what we did. We contacted key stakeholders with relevant expertise, and we conducted some additional interviews when we weren't able to find everything we hoped to find on this topic. So just as an example, we've tried to give you details of how each comment was addressed. And there are a few comments that were not addressed in the report, and we'll talk a little bit about those too. So just please digest that on your own time and reach out if you have any questions. We can also talk about that during this call if anyone wants to. All right, let's go right into the document. And like I said, please just holler if you want us to zoom in and talk about anything as we pass it by. But Desiree's going to drive us through the document, and we'll chat as we go.
All right, so one of the first significant changes we made is that we just wanted to revise and clarify the report's purpose. And we also just wanted to emphasize the contributing authors and stakeholders that helped shape the report. And all of the changes will be in red text. So that's your giveaway and how you'll know how much we changed as we scroll through the report here.
Yeah, and just another, if you see green text, it means it got moved, but it didn't change. So just to let you know what that is.
All right, we did add a description of the jury process and how they will shape the final report and hopefully the optional stakeholder chapter. We revised the geographic scope just to highlight more of the watershed's hydrology and how all of these upper, lower, and dry Devils basins come together. So based on some stakeholder feedback we received, we updated the entire Indigenous history section just so that it was more detailed and based on more recent archaeological research that has occurred in the region. Scrolling down to our next big change here, which is the discussion of water management in Texas and groundwater management specifically. As you can see by all the red text, we heavily revised it just so that it was more neutral and that we didn't discuss GCDs as any type of management option. We just really wanted to give a brief description of how it's managed in Texas.
Yeah, and I want to add a little bit there because this is an example of an area where we did get a lot of comments. Many of you might remember we had several comments come in around including the reason to not have a GCD in Valverde County. And we decided as a team to not include that information because this section, this introduction, is just describing the region. So our groundwater section here is just describing hey, there are 5 counties and 4 of them have GCDs and 1 of them doesn't. And keeping it very high level and descriptive of the current conditions. So our goal here was just to kind of stick to the facts of what exists and is in place. And so we did not enter into any conversation of the pros and cons of a GCD. And the concern was if we included sort of the justification for not having one, we would also have to include the justification for having one, and didn't feel that that was really even in the nature of what we're trying to accomplish with the State of the Devils River report. As you know, it's meant to be a descriptive state of the region snapshot. So happy to keep talking about that, but did want to be really transparent that that was something we all thought a lot about, and would love your eyes on this section to make sure that you think it is neutral. We strove for that and hope we accomplish that. And just wanted to explain why that specific comment did not make its way into the text of the report.
Okay, we also added an entirely new section called Watershed Threats and Challenges, and this was added to emphasize key areas of concern facing all of the report's focus areas, which are groundwater science, water quality, species and their flow needs, and sustainable recreation.
And I wanted to mention too on this section, some of this content was in the report, but it was spread out into the different technical sections. The technical teams actually developed a lot of this content, but it was nested in the separate sections. So we tried to bring it together so that, it just flowed better and would read more comprehensively.
Alrighty, and then we also added, or we didn't add, but we kind of just expanded the wind energy and solar energy discussions. Let's go down to wind energy. So luckily, wind energy had a lot of research that we were able to pull so we could expand on its development history, potential impacts on wildlife and human health, and then just stakeholder concerns in the watershed, specifically, those flashing red lights on the wind turbines. But unfortunately, some of the like solar energy didn't have a lot of research behind it, or some of these other renewable energy projects that might come into the watershed. So we just expanded that discussion to focus on stakeholder concerns and make a recommendation that future research should really focus on these impacts of these types of projects.
Yeah, and I wanted to call out here, you'll see those two boxes that are, or the lines that are kind of standing alone there in the middle. Everywhere you see that in the document is a place where we have reached out to local experts, some of you even on this webinar, to ask you to kind of tell the story about these topics and what is known locally. So we've done a series of interviews with folks from the region, and we are waiting to get final text approved by those folks before we include anything here. So these are places where we've looked for additional information from lived experience, and we hope to include that information, but it's all of these segments are subject to the approval of the person that we interviewed. So let me ask Sarah to kind of give a quick overview of how many of those did we do, Sarah, for the report?
I believe we did about 8 or 9. So we had 8 or 9 people that we spent some time with interviewing. We had some questions determined by the technical teams to, specifically fill certain gaps, knowledge gaps. So I think we have all of this content developed, and it's just we're in process getting that approval to include it.
So we may or may not have it for the final report. It really depends on the person's comfort with including it or not. So, but we hope we do. And so we held a spot for the targeted information.
All righty. So during our first webinar and our first symposium, we got a lot of feedback of additional threats that were identified by the stakeholders. So we just updated this public and private land challenges list here to include those. And we also added 2 paragraphs about the DRA and the DRC, just explaining how these groups were formed to address some of these challenges.
Yeah, and I'll add here too, this is the one section of the report that we're going to take back to the stakeholder jury and ask for their kind of specific review. So my hope is this might be a little more filled out when you see the final version. Also, for those of you in the Devils River Association, would love your help with the narrative there. I pulled that from your mission statement, but I know that we could say more about what you do and the history of the organization. So would love some help with that if anyone has the time.
All right, so that's it for the introduction changes, and we're going to start getting into the changes that were made, or the big significant changes that were made to each tech team section. So groundwater really did help, or they really did knock it out of the park. And so a lot of the stakeholder feedbacks that were received were really focused around the groundwater data gaps and research needs and recommendations for future research. So what we added here is we added a sentence in just to emphasize that any type of research recommendation that's made, it's important to cooperate with these private property landowners, and it should be on a strictly voluntary basis, ensuring full transparency of methods and data use are conveyed to the property owner. And we put that sentence in throughout each of the relevant recommendations that call for some type of cooperation like this, like expanded monitoring. And we did the same thing with the rest of the tech team sections.
And we welcome your feedback if that could be, if that wording could be improved, but we thought it was important to make sure that that was showing up in each place that was making any sort of recommendation that was on the ground.
And then for data gaps, this number 3 here, the question was revised just to include some stakeholder questions that were received. And then here in the red is where you're seeing that added in stakeholder private property owner sentence. And then in their recommendations, they added 2 additional research recommendations. The first being a more thorough investigation of San Felipe Spring systems. And then the second was creating and maintaining a map of monitoring points that was available to the stakeholders in the region. So that's it for the big the big groundwater science changes. And now we'll get into the water quality updates. So we did receive a lot of feedback and incorporated it. So the first big change is we added the wastewater section here as a potential contaminant. A lot of folks were interested in how wastewater discharge could impact water quality. The oil and gas section was updated just to address some concerns around the impacts of oil and gas injection wells. We got some feedback saying that we should discuss pharmaceuticals and forever chemicals as contaminants of emerging concern. So all of this in the red was added. When discussing water quality standards, a metals section was added and its history being monitored in the Devils River. And then the last big changes were in the data gaps and recommendations sections. So the data gap sections, as you can see here, was heavily revised just for improved readability. We also got some comments from stakeholders saying that there is a decline in water quality, although this isn't shown in the monitoring studies that had been done. So some additional recommendations were added, just focused on expanding and improving the water quality network. Here's that sentence at the top, just stating that, again, any cooperation with private property landowners should be strictly voluntary. And then you can see here, the recommendations were just updated based on feedback and for readability. All right, we're going to move into the species and flow section now. This entire section was red, but this is just because it was reworked a little bit for the second draft report.
What is that section, Desiree? Can you tell?
Yes, it's just talking about how the Devils River is located at 3 ecoregions, and then it dives into each ecoregion.
Right.
Okay, let's see here. In the red here, the discussion on fish assemblage surveys was updated so it reflected a more neutral tone and to emphasize the need for more comprehensive surveys, not focused on federally listed species, but all of these important, beautiful species in the Devils River. All right. So we have some placeholders here, like Harry was talking about earlier, just for discussions on brush control and OWDAT impacts. And we got a lot of comments wanting to see OWDAT impacts, and this is in the public and private land challenges section, but we have this placeholder here for the team to expand on it. And here's another placeholder for a discussion on upland invasive species. People were interested in seeing a discussion on black bears and mountain lions in the region. And the team added in these small paragraphs here, but they did reach out to stakeholders with relevant expertise and are hoping to include their narratives from the interviews that were conducted per their approval. All right, moving into the data gaps and research needs. This section was heavily updated, as you can see by all the red text. Each bullet was just refined with more neutral language and to provide a little bit more context on why these were identified as data gaps. And then you might notice that 1 through 5 are data gaps that were in the first draft, but this number 6 here was added based on stakeholder comments that were received, specifically around flushing flows and how they're not as prevalent in the watershed anymore, and if that has an impact on these species. Okay, recommendations were revised and expanded to make more specific recs around species inventories and habitat monitoring. And so in the first report, this was just a paragraph at first, but now it has been broken down into bullets. And then these sentences around, you know, any cooperation with landowners should be voluntary, that was added.
I just want to make a note here before we go into the last section. One thing we worked on was trying to make the four components, technical components, a little more consistent in how the sections were broken out. So I think we had a big improvement in that regard. But you'll notice that each of the sections sort of just ends abruptly. And we're going to try in this next month to come back and add kind of a takeaways paragraph so that folks can kind of go straight to the end and see like, okay, here's basically what's being recommended and why. And so that's something we're still working on. Just want to share that note.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, moving into sustainable recreation. I know a lot of you are excited for this. A lot of the comments we received were for the sustainable recreation tech team. And so they made a lot of edits throughout their entire section, and we're going to get into that. So this last paragraph here was just added to highlight that while the tech team aimed to provide balanced information collected from both public and private sources, just with how the limitations now with record keeping, they didn't find a lot of private source information. So a lot of the information in the section is publicly sourced. And getting into what is sustainable recreation, this paragraph just emphasizes that definition and its context to recreation in the Devils River. Here's our next big change. We got a lot of comments on, wanting to understand the impacts of recreation. And so the tech team just really highlighted that. That is a big need in the watershed. And this entire section hopefully is the beginning of understanding and filling in these data gaps. Alrighty. Let's see here. Here, the tech team just added in a discussion on the gradient boundary. We got a stakeholder who gave us a resource to include, so they included that here. And then they also just expanded the discussion on the draft system, the limits to that system, and how it's just not currently known how many total paddlers are on the river and how many paddlers are operating independently of that draft system. But they do identify this as an important data gap. In the red here, this paragraph was just added to talk about that while the Dan A. Hughes unit lodge is still under development and that there was a lot of concern around the 95 visitor limit, the draft system isn't expected to change and it'll remain limited to 12 permits per day. So we did get some comments about there's going to be 95 people on the river, but from what the tech team was looking into and researching, it should only be 12 and that's not expected to change even after the unit opens. All right, the next big change here is that there were some comments about wanting to understand how paddlers are launching from Baker's Crossing and also from the state natural area. So both of those methods were included here. There were comments about the nesting bald eagles and the potential recreation impacts that to those nesting eagles. So the tech team addressed that and just highlighted that whatever happened this year, it didn't impact the nesting eagles, and there's not likely going to be large impacts in the future. Indigenous cultural site visitation, this section was expanded, including the damage to Indigenous cultural sites as we get into law enforcement here. And then the tech team also expanded this, just violations that are occurring along the river, and then stakeholder concerns and issues with trespassing, and also issues with paddler rescues. And those were the main changes throughout the section. And now we'll get into the changes in the data gaps and recommendations. So this section was largely updated and improved for readability, and just really emphasized the need for demographic data, that a lot of these questions in the data gaps section would be solved if you know, the region could get some more data on who's coming to the watershed, how many, and how they're getting their information. And then you can see here that the recommendations section was heavily updated just to provide a little bit more context on each study and why the tech team recommended it. And then all of these recommendations were also updated to include that sentence again that we're talking about, to respect private property rights, and any cooperation with landowners should be strictly voluntary. So that's the end of the changes to the tech team sections. Carrie, I don't know if you want to discuss a little bit about this optional stakeholder chapter that we have going on here.
Yeah, I'll just mention it largely to tell you to just take it with some lightness, because the whether we have a stakeholder chapter or not is really up to the jury. These are some of the things that we're sharing with the jury. We're asking them to look at those identified watershed threats and to talk about some of your feedback about what the challenges are for private landowners and public landowners, and asking them to kind of think about all of these things that they've learned and identify whether there's anything they think they'd like to recommend moving forward. So I really don't know yet if we're going to have a stakeholder chapter or not. We have a placeholder right now, and the starting point for that is just a discussion of some of these threats and the learnings of this experience of writing the report. So we will be working with them pretty actively in the coming weeks, and we'll do our best to keep everybody updated and encourage you to reach out to those folks if you have suggestions. But right now, this is really a placeholder.
And then in the red here was just our additions of all the relevant comments that we're going to be sharing with them. All righty.
And then Desiree, I don't know if you remember, but do you want to share our final numbers on the resources in the literature?
Oh man, we had over 884. I think that was the actual number, 884 total resources.
Incredible. And I know that's not all of them, but I just want to reiterate that part of this project has been gathering that information, and not only gathering that list, but actually gathering each one of those citations. So we are building a library that you will all have for years to come. And so it's another kind of win of this project I'm excited about. So that was really the objective of this call. It wasn't meant to be lengthy, but we are here and available to answer any questions. Happy to dive into any of these things that Desiree highlighted. The goal was just to show you kind of what the difference between the two is, because it is a large report. And anyway, let me just open it up and see if there are any questions or comments. Okay. Well, as you know, that door is always open. Our intention was just to help you along with the review, if you have the time to take another look at this and think about what's missing. You know, this is really getting close to what the final will look like. So if you feel like something important is not here, this is the time to highlight that. Also, if we're missing an important topic or some important context, you know, please do let us know. We want this to be something that's useful for you first and foremost. So,
and Carrie, if I could mention, for this first round, we got a total of 115 stakeholder comments, and Word is telling us we made 188 revisions, but Anna thinks it's a lot more than that. But we would love to get a ton of more comments, and we'd love to make a ton more revisions. So please go through and let us know what we can update.
And Desiree now knows a lot about Aoudad, so you can call her about that anytime. Well, thank y'all for being here on such short notice, especially. Please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And thanks for making time today. We'll see you soon.